Good afternoon, everyone. Talking to my favorite people in the audience right now, our employees. Just kidding. All right, so before I introduce myself to this audience, this wide audience, I am going to ask a trivia question. And for those that don't get it, you'll be fired. All right, what anniversary is marked in 2024? Yeah, what anniversary in 2024? Incorrect. It's the 20th anniversary of when the ONC came to reality. So 20 years ago, the government started to crack down, I guess, on interoperability and started to put a lot of movement behind health information exchange and electronic exchange. So 2004. So here I sit 20 years later, you're still seeing my face, still seeing the face of others. We're still talking about interoperability. And so why is it real? Why can we say that the future of healthcare communication is now? Why wasn't it 2004? Why wasn't it 10 years ago? Why wasn't it 5 years ago? Why isn't it in the future? So why am I still sitting here if the future of healthcare communication is now? Well, we're going to talk about that here in the next few slides, but that is a question to ask when 20 years later, I always say on podcasts and interviews is when I'm not up on the front stage talking about interoperability, then I know we've done our job. And we've actually achieved our mission as future of healthcare communication. So how did we get here? So we're going to go through a little bit of history here that's important to understand what we're seeing for interoperability. So in 2009, we saw the ARA and the High Tech Act be passed, which out of that came meaningful use. I have a whole list here. So 2010 was the Affordable Care Act. 2014 was the Impact Act. 2016 was the 21st Century Cures Act. 2018 was the first version of the US CDI that was passed for interoperability. 2018 was actually the first version of TEFCA, QHIN, that we see come forward as part of 2018. 2019 was when ONC and CMS started to come together and started to put forth legislation and standards that promoted patient access and interoperability. And then in 2020, we saw CMS come forward with their own ruling for discharge, CMS discharge ruling, and multiple rulings that came after that to then fast forward as we're sitting here today, and we've seen every year, we're sitting here today with 7 designated QHINs and the push for interoperability like we've never seen it before from the federal government. So 20 years later, here's what we've seen, movement every year at an increasing speed, so we can say that truly we're seeing healthcare information exchange change, and we're in the winds of change have now finally come forward as part of how did we get here and what are we looking at. So as we look at the next few years, what does it look like? We're going to discuss why did No2 become a QHIN. I'm going to go back to the foundations of when I started the company in 2012, actually started the company, and we were very focused to the provider community and absolutely have stayed focused to providers as part of our communication when No2 became a QHIN. And with part of that, we had 2 fundamental tenets of the company. First thing is we're going to do is create a single API. I always say bring calm to the chaos, provide a single API for all forms of communication across healthcare. And we have that today. It's a communication API. But the second part of why we stood up the business was really to focus to what we consider to be the overlooked parts of the market. So while everybody else was chasing the dollars in healthcare and chasing meaningful use dollars, we went the other direction for No2. And we went after post-acute, behavioral, vision, dental, emergency medical services, and said until I have these communities wrapped up and I have the smaller provider communities wrapped up around the health system, I really don't have a healthcare network at all. If I only have one side of the equation, the referring providers, the eligible providers, I really don't have a network at all until I can wrap up the entire care community and get to all 4 corners of healthcare, which is why No2 at that time pushed very hard into those markets. And today we represent 120,000 post-acute organizations and therapies. We represent about 70% of emergency medical services, about 30% of behavioral health, which is actually a fastest growing segment of healthcare, and bringing them forward as part of our QHIN network. And we feel in becoming a QHIN, as we looked at it and we've connected to all the major networks, so starting with early on direct secure messaging, moving into Care Quality Commonwealth and all the forms of exchange, the state HIEs, they have all been accumulative to a path that now has brought us to QHIN and pushing forward into a qualified health information network. So for us, it was our responsibility. We had to bring it forward to our audience, and we owed it to the health systems in the audience too. We had to be able to bring forward a community of providers, tens of thousands of providers that would be connected to the health systems and connected to the providers, so we could actually start to solve real problems in healthcare and start to see real issues change in healthcare. And that's why we became a QHIN. That's why we came forward, is that we're still very much mission driven. We're focused to the provider community, because our fundamental feeling is that if we solve the problems for providers across the ecosystem, the major workflows for their provider community, we'll solve, once and for all, we'll solve the interoperability challenge. Right now we're watching healthcare kind of, I would say it's a bandwagon industry, so you can see it kind of pushing into different parts of interoperability that are very, very important. But until we have a level playing field across the healthcare ecosystem and every provider, and that's every provider from facility-based care to care that's happening in the home, to care that's happening for social work, that work that we see going on in low-income housing, across the ecosystem, the care providers that sit there need to have access to the clinical information and be able to take care of the patients, or we have not solved any problems at all until we solve these problems in their reality. So what do we believe TEFCA QHIN represents for healthcare? Why is it different than all the other initiatives that we've seen? And what I'll start with is saying, what does it not mean for healthcare? What does TEFCA and QHIN not mean? Well, it does not mean a new set of standards. It does not mean yet another set of standards that EHR technologies, digital health platforms have to implement. It is a set of standards that have been tried and true for now almost 20 years, many of them. FHIR is 10 years old. Most people don't recognize that FHIR has a long life, so it's not a new set of technical standards that we hope are going to solve the problem this time. It is a set of standards where we've cut our teeth for the last 15 years on figuring out how does information exchange work. We've worked on privacy, we've worked on security, we've handled these issues. Now there's a lot more to go, but it's not relearning these things, it's taking our learnings from the past 10, 15 years, bringing them together with a consortium of vendors to truly get to the heart of the problems and truly solve this problem once and for all in healthcare, and solve interoperability once and for all for healthcare. And we're seeing a ton of momentum. I'll say in the time that I've spent in interoperability, which is longer than I want to say on this stage because I'm being recorded. So in the time that I've been in interoperability, we've seen it. I've never seen anything like this in healthcare. I've never seen the momentum behind this type of effort, and it's because of that public-private partnership that we're seeing when the government is putting as much emphasis behind it, because we're really in a state of crisis. We are. It's unfortunate we had to get to this point, but we're in a state of crisis as a healthcare system. And we're on the verge of breakdown, and until we can work through these issues and fundamentally change them, we're pushing into standards, and we're pushing into a communication infrastructure that's going to change how we're looking at it. And I can say that for myself and for the other dozen at QHINs, that they fundamentally feel the same in solving these problems once and for all for healthcare. One of the interesting things is I did some research on the timeline in the history of everything that we've seen and all the pace and the momentum shift that we've seen in healthcare, was looking at what the Cures Act stood for. So here's another trivia question. So what are the 3 principles of the Cures Act that they were seeking to solve? Dr. Blair, you have to know this, Dr. Blair. Not that I can hear anything, so I'm reading lips. So the first one was, so it was part of it. So it was first one was transform healthcare. That was our stated objective. But what does that mean? We have to transform healthcare. The second one was promote research. And the third one was empower patients in their journey. Those were the 3 stated objectives of the Cures Act. Those are pretty lofty goals, right? And I mean, if I poll the audiences, how far down that journey do we think we've made it? And we look at then what CMS brought forward with their patient access rule. It was all about the patient. And it was really an attempt to say, well, if I can't get the provider communities to come together the way we need to, maybe if I go the patient route, I can solve this problem of getting access to information. And our fundamental belief as a company is, or as a company, is that we have to solve the provider problem first. So we're very focused to the treatment aspects of QHIN, and individual access, of course, is critically important, and all these other purposes of use, critically important. But what good does individual access do if I have 50 to 60% of my providers that aren't on the network, that aren't available for query? So as a patient, I can send out a broadcast for information and query for information, and it's crickets. I'm getting nothing back, right? I'm not getting anything. So until we solve and we bring a level playing field to the provider community, and we bring every provider in healthcare, and provider is a wide definition in healthcare, and we get their records online, we're not solving the core problem of information exchange in healthcare. And we absolutely believe TEFCA and QHIN are in a position to do this, along with our participants that sit around the edges of the QHIN. We'll be able to solve this fundamentally once and for all. So what are the next steps? We talk about this internally a lot because a lot of people looked at, oh man, once you're a designate QHIN, isn't everything solved? And not even close, right? We're just getting started. And I don't say that from a negative standpoint that we're not even close, but it's really about working with the edge technologies. And what do we mean by when I say edge? I'm talking about every technology system that we see here, electronic health records across the continuum. I don't know if most people know this, there's 6,000 electronic health records of version across the healthcare ecosystem. We talk about the top 8, the top 10. There's actually 6,000 that serve the healthcare ecosystem. So when people say, well, Therasa, why is this hard? Why is it hard to bring up a network? Can't you and I still get so tired of the illustration. Can't you just bring up like the ATM network? Can't you just do that? And I'm like, well, they're solving a problem of 0 to 9 in the ATM network, and it's not even close to that kind of information exchange, especially when we look at the various segments of healthcare. So you have your provider population, that is your primary care providers, you have your specialty care providers, you have your behavioral health providers, you have therapy providers. They're all fundamentally different businesses, and they have different information that's sitting in each of their systems. So to try to create an ecosystem of data exchange across that's really hard. And that's a lot of work to be done. So the next step for us as a QHIN is absolutely focusing to our edge participants and helping them build the right workflow. Because if that workflow isn't right at the edge, adoption is the key. The QHINs are great, but we could be sitting here all day long, and if we don't get adoption at the edge, we'll be having a different conversation a year from now, 5 years from now. We'll be talking about something else. So it's really about focusing to the edge and working with those that adopt our API to make sure they understand what the workflows need to be there so they're frictionless for that provider community. A provider shouldn't have to think about, what does it mean? What does TEFCA mean? What does interoperability mean? I'd prefer if I never heard that word again from a provider. All they should have to think about is, how do I deliver care better with these tools? And those tools should be served up to them, whatever platform that they're using. And that is the next step, and that is the next step for all the QHINs to say, what does it mean to get to adoption at the edge? How do we drive adoption to our edge technologies? Because without that, again, we're not going to meet success. So we call on every one of the vendors here, and we also call on the providers. Our chief health officer often says, we have a learned helplessness in the provider community, meaning that they also have to lean in. They have to lean in to see us get over this chasm of getting information exchange. So I'm not sitting here 10 years from now and talking about the 30-year anniversary of the ONC, and we're at the same spot. Believe me, I think I might be dead by then, but let's, 30 years from now, let's move past that. So, sorry. But yeah, so the next steps is all about the edge. We're very focused to that. We have a long, fun road ahead of us to push forward into that provider community, because we want to see every other use case come forward and push into it. And I look at it, and so it's funny with treatment. People are like, well, what is it about treatment? Why aren't you focused to some of these other purposes of use? And I say, well, when you look at the most fundamental workflow in care coordination, which is referrals and transitions of care, are still broken. 60% of them are still handled manually in healthcare. Well, we're missing something, right? We got to push back into the referral and transition of care workflow, and then start moving into these other workflows, so we see our provider community be able to level up, so we can address the demands of the patient. We can address the demands of the payer. The payers have access to the major systems, right? Payers can get access to Epic. They can get access to Certers today. It's what we always say is the final mile providers they don't have access to today. And those, by the way, are becoming the most important providers in healthcare. when we are staring down the barrel of 2030, we're going to have more seniors in this country than we will have minors. We have a real challenge to get our hands around in the post-acute community. And they're moving care to the home and facility-based care. And to do that, we have to bring up those 120,000 provider organizations in post-acute and get them connected to the ecosystem. Otherwise, again, we'll be sitting here 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and having the same conversation. Until we level up, we're not at the right space. So I'll end with is what do we see as the challenges and the opportunities? I would say that the challenge in TEFCA QHIN, this is T-Bell's opinion, and I'm going to say it's an opinion of no to you, is that we could get distracted and move beyond the purpose of use for treatment with other purposes of use, and again be sitting here and having the wrong conversations. Our distractions. So we got to stay focused to solving the fundamental problems in healthcare and what we're focused into, and that distraction will always be a risk that we have because healthcare is a bandwagon industry. We all know it, right? So it's the latest and greatest thing is going to be at your next trade show. Stay focused, push through, but our challenge is to actually take the standards that have been developed over the last 10, 15 years and see them in use, see them come to reality. So we talk about QHIN and the QTF. Most people don't know it. Actually, it's pull and push. It has both forms of communication, and that's just the baseline. So how do we take that baseline and solve additional workflows in healthcare, clinical workflows? Well, that requires leaning in. That requires the edge to come forward and say, hey, I need that standard to do this. All right, hey, we have this problem that standard doesn't address. How do we solve that problem? And then we need the providers to go forward with adoption. So those are our opportunities, is to actually push in, see the reality of it, and start pushing into the reality and see it come to fruition in the next few years and really see it. But like I said, we've never seen change like this. The tailwinds are there. The winds of change, I say, do you hear it? The winds of change have occurred, and this is happening. Now we're pushing forward into a sea change in healthcare, and excited to be able to serve the community here. So thank you very much. I think I forgot to introduce myself. That's okay. I do that often. I'm Therasa Bell. I said as the president and CTO. I'm co-founder of the organization from 12 years ago. So thank you. I'll open it up for questions. That's it. No questions. That's perfect. Oh.